The investigative website The Intercept is reporting that Saudi Arabia, backed by the UAE, had plans to invade Qatar. The article says the only reason the invasion didn't happen last year was because of Rex Tillerson, who at the time was the US Secretary of State. The Intercept reports Tillerson heard about the plans from Qatari intelligence and that his pressure on the Saudis and Emiratis incensed them so much that it may have cost him his job. In March, the US President Donald Trump fired Tillerson on Twitter 1 week before the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman arrived at the White House. To discuss this, I'm joined now from Doha by the former FBI agent Martin Reardon. He is now a senior director of the Qatar International Academy for Security Studies. In Riyadh is Salman al Ansari. He is the founder of the Washington-based Saudi American Public Relations Affairs Committee. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the Newsmakers. Same question to both of you, starting with Salman. What do you make of this story that Rex Tillerson put pressure on Riyadh and the UAE not to invade Qatar?
Yeah, thank you, Adnan, and hi to your honorable guest, Mr. Martin. And yeah, basically, when it comes to this theme, I think it has been talked a lot about it with a lot of allegations and speculations in different media reports. But we need to look at basically the facts. The facts cannot be traced until we know the history of these countries. The history of these countries have nothing to do with involving themselves into direct wars with other countries without having a legitimate cause or legitimate kind of demand, just like what happened in Yemen, or just like what happened when the King of Bahrain asked Saudi Arabia and the GCC to come and support them. So I don't see this to be very factual. I don't see it to be very accurate because, like, we have seen all the reports that talked about why Tillerson has been fired. Like, there are four major scenarios. One, like in the US media, they talk about that Tillerson wants to hit the North Korea negotiation, which Trump did not want. But this is still a media report. Yes, it is backed by anonymous officials, etc., just like what happened with the Intercept report. But also, if you look at the Intercept report, it says it clearly that the major or the beginning of this talk about Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates to invade Qatar has happened and started from the Qataris themselves. So the Intercept report says it clearly that the whole story started from the narrative of the Qataris. So I don't know if they convinced some media platforms in the West or in the US. Maybe this is something interesting. And the other thing is people speak about Tillerson differences with Trump. You know, like the things about like what happened in the media when they say Tillerson insulted Trump in closed doors when he called him like a moron or something like that in the media. So people also speak about this as a possible scenario. The other thing is about the conflict of interest, because people sometimes think in the US, maybe the White House itself as well, that Rex Tillerson was acting on behalf or with ExxonMobil's kind of interest rather than the U.S. interest. I'm not here to confirm this or that, but all what I'm trying to say is Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, I think they had no intention at all whatsoever to intervene or to have a military kind of intervention in Qatar, because it's not needed at all. We can actually make Qatar to be going on the right path and stop supporting terrorism by the means that we are using right now.
Okay, two separate issues to start with, Martin. Rex Tillerson being dismissed, that's a fact. And then Salman says we won't know the facts about any potential invasion as well, because we're talking about that until more details come out. Surely we will only ever know that if someone from the UAE or from Saudi Arabia admits that there was a potential plan. How do you see those two separate issues? And then, of course, they are conjoined.
Well, I think as far as a planned invasion by the Saudis and the Emiratis into Qatar, in all likelihood, it was discussed. Geopolitical conflicts like this, when there's a number of options that are looked at. What can you do diplomatically? What can you do with information warfare? What can you do with economic sanctions? What can you do with military options? But I think both countries, they're rational leaders, and they would have decided fairly early on that it's not worth the risk. for the Saudis and the Emiratis to invade a much smaller country, Qatar, would have been looked at, particularly in the article where it said for economic reasons, they would have been international pariahs. It'd be similar to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990. So it may have been put on as an option. These are often done that way, but no serious consideration given to it. On your second point, could his interest in this or cooling things caused friction with the administration and eventually led to his downfall? Again, as Salman said, there were at least a dozen major incidents between or disagreements between Secretary Tillerson and President Trump. This was the first major disagreement, but then every month up until the time he was fired, it continued, and a number of the major ones Salman mentioned. The day before Secretary Tillerson was fired, that was when he disagreed with the president, or he took the side of Prime Minister Theresa May in saying that this investigation, the fact that it was nerve agents that the Russians were known to have produced, and that they were involved, that upset the White House, and within 24 hours he was gone.
Okay, Salman, UK intelligence and US intelligence says there was a plan by Saudi Arabia, backed by the UAE, to invade in the summer of 2017, to invade Qatar. On 20th of June, the State Department said Tillerson had more than 20 telephone calls and meetings with Gulf and other regional and intermediate actors, including 3 phone calls and 2 meetings with the Saudi foreign minister. Can we at least presume, would you be able to analyze whether Saudi Arabia would be upset at Rex Tillerson or any US Secretary of State trying to mediate between the Gulf nations that are having a dispute, Qatar on the one side and then Saudi Arabia and 3 other countries on the other side? Would they be upset at just the Americans being involved with what they might consider to be a regional and domestic matter?
Yeah. Thank you, Adnan. I think I'm going to speak on my capacity as a Saudi citizen and analyst of political affairs. And I think, yes, indeed, that Tillerson, I kind of feel that the region, specifically Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, I feel that they do not have huge kind of chemistry with Tillerson. But does that mean that we wanted him out, or we pushed for him to be out? I think this is too much to believe, and it's like an accumulated kind of things. It's a lot of things that built up in the White House, I think, that made the president to fire Mr. Tillerson. I don't see it to be having anything to do with a possible kind of invasion, because this is more of it's just not factual. It's not even logic.
Martin, if we suppose that the relationship over the past 50 or 60 years between Washington and Riyadh has been based largely on Americans buying Saudi oil, and now the United States being largely energy independent, can you give us an analysis of where the future relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia is going?
No, I don't think oil is going to play. I mean, the United States, it's been a number of decades since Saudi Arabia was a major supplier of oil. The United States' interest in oil in the Gulf, not so much as a supplier, but to ensure the free movement of oil, just because of the impact that any restriction would have on the global economy. But I think if you look back over the last, we'll go back over 50 or 60 years, Saudi Arabia and the United States have had a very close relationship. And I think the Saudis, during the second 4 years, the second term for the Obama administration, felt that they were pushed off a little bit. This is when the Obama administration was pushing hard for the Iran deal, despite Saudi pushback against that. But the Obama administration went through with this. And then throughout the campaign in 2016, then candidate Trump was not in favor of the Iran deal. He wanted it pulled out and done away with. And I think the Saudis saw this as a potential ally back in the White House that they can work with. So there was a lot of effort by both the Saudis and the Emiratis to restore that relationship with the United States. For Iran primarily, And then I think when the blockade started in June 2017, they thought they would have more support just based on the summit that occurred in Saudi Arabia just weeks before. But there's an interest there in keeping those relations strong. And I think as far as Secretary Tillerson, the Saudis and the Emiratis were no doubt very upset with his efforts to quiet things with the blockade, to get the sides to talk. And remember, Secretary Tillerson came out publicly and said, where's the complaint here? You don't even have any demands. You haven't said what's bothering you. And then within a matter of a few days, the list of 10 demands came out publicly, what the Saudis, what the quartet wanted. But I think they both looked at Secretary Tillerson as a potential threat to their relationship with the administration. One, because of his stance with Qatar, trying to mediate, but also Secretary Tillerson was very pro-Iran deal. He did not want the president to pull out of that, and that is something he campaigned on, and he had to do to satisfy his base. So, yes, the Saudis and Emiratis looked at him as a threat. Was that the reason he was fired? That was one of several things. And again, Salman mentioned a few, and then it went right up until the day before with the nerve agent attack in the UK. President Trump, and they'd been rumored about this since November, for 5 months before.
Okay.
President Trump had enough. He fired him.
Salman, we are running out of time. We are out of time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Newsmakers.